Hi, welcome to the exhibit Pieces of Time. This is a really interesting exhibit that looks at the impact of fabric arts throughout history. It is something that is very diverse and involves many different societies, nationalities, ideas. It can be considered art or it can be an object that is utilitarian. I'm going to take you through some of our great examples of quilt design and fabric arts. So come with me as we look at Pieces of Time at the Edwardine Museum.
Let's look at two quilts, the colonial Jamestown quilt and the Trail to Treadleona quilt. Jamestown was the first successful permanent English settlement in what would become the United States. Archaeologists have found nearly 200 iron sewing needles from England that the colonialists would have used to mend clothes and make quilts. And scattered amongst these are some bone needles. This is possible evidence of the interaction between native inhabitants and members of colonial Jamestown in the creation of textiles. But patterned fabrics would have been almost impossible to find in colonial America, and instead they used a popular technique invented in the 17th century where small designs were cut from scraps of solid fabric and then carefully applied to a larger foundational fabric. The Trail to Treadleona quilt was made by the Treadle-On Block Exchange, an example of the 21st century quilting bee. This is an internet message group for quilters who share a love for people-powered machines like treadles and hand cranks. There were approximately 84 participants in the spring 2004 exchange. The blocks were for an anything goes scrap quilt. Members created blocks from cotton fabrics of the designer's choice and unbleached muslin to share with their fellow quilters. The quilt consists of 100 6.5-inch blocks and shaded 4-patch pattern. The quilter's name, people-powered machine used, and the location are written in the muslin fabric. The blocks came from American quilters and one from British Columbia. This quilt illustrates how people from varied walks of life can share a common interest and in the end create a one-of-a-kind art piece. Quilting is often created an opportunity to gather together with friends in a common task. Quilting bees or quilting circles gained popularity in the 1800s. While the final goal was to finish a quilt, the reason many continued to be part of these quilting groups was for the fellowship. In the 18th and 19th centuries, parties were usually small, 2 to 3 neighbors working together to finish up a quilt before the cold of winter set in. Other times the goal of a quilting bee was mainly social. An example of this was when a bride-to-be gathered with friends and family to finish up her quilts before marriage. These two quilts are an example of wedding quilts. We had a great opportunity to talk with one of our fabric artists, Allison Allen. Listen in while she talks to us about her work.
I've been sewing since I was 6 years of age. I learned to sew from an older sister. My mom used to make all of our school clothes, so someone in the household was always sewing. I'm inspired by other artists, mainly from the mid-century modern and Harlem Renaissance period. I've interpreted many photographs and paintings and pieces of sculpture into textile art inspired by those artists. I enjoy the Harriet Powers pieces. This is Harriet Powers' second quilt. This is the pictorial quilt. Her first quilt was the Bible quilt, and both of the quilts depict images from Bible stories. They also depict events like solar and lunar eclipses, and even a circus that traveled through her part of the country while she was alive. The majority of the workshops that I teach are on African American improvisational quilting, which is modern quilting right now. And I also teach how to recreate antique applique quilts like the ones that I've made.
We've been speaking with Allison Allen. She is a contemporary artist in the fabric, and she creates quilts that are historical as well as abstract, beautiful. We just want to thank her for coming today.
Our next artist, Amanda Miller, loves to push fabric art in many directions. Let's hear where she gets her inspiration.
So I like to experiment. Most of my quilts are made with applique pieces, random shapes. I like to collage my fabric and just kind of play. And since I do a lot of work in other mediums like collage and painting, I like to throw those into my textile work and mix it up. So it's much more of a mixed media piece than a traditional quilt. Yet I started from there traditionally and learned how to do everything the right way before experimenting. My Urban Gardener piece was very, very much one of my favorites because I got to use scraps that were gifted to me from another textile artist who made dresses and ethnic robes. She actually just gifted me her scraps because she was impressed with my work. But I used her scraps as they were without cutting them down, and I created kind of a tessellated looking human shape, and that led into it becoming an urban gardener because at the time I was trying to grow a garden on a rooftop outside my studio. So full circle, that was the inspiration behind that part. I actually gave that quilt to my mother because she herself is a gardener and we live in an urban environment, so it reminded me a lot of her as well. And that quilt I actually incorporated watercolor and vintage textiles as well, so there's a lot of experimenting on that piece. The background is like a watercolored linen tablecloth that was probably really badly stained, so hence the watercolor.
Well, we just want to thank Amanda Muller for coming today and talking to us about her quilt making experience. And we realize that she's a fabric artist, a sculptor, a watercolorist, a teacher, and we really appreciate her taking the time to tell us a little bit about her work. And we hope the brightly colored ribbon skirt is a traditional piece of clothing for many Native American women and girls. These skirts honor their heritage and are a symbol of womanhood. They tell a story of adaptation and survival. Women and girls wear ribbon skirts at tribal celebrations such as a powwow, where they perform together in a dance ceremony. This exhibit demonstrates the creativity involved in creating fabric art. We hope you've enjoyed but a few of the ways that artists use this versatile medium.